Hello, everyone. It is Ayana, okay, now I'm live, I think. Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. It is Ayana, your coach, okay, your coach and your educator. And I'm here to talk to you today about cultural gaslighting. But before we jump into that, if you are not familiar with me, I am a life and health coach. And what I do is I specialize in helping people transform their mindsets. Okay, transform the negative self talk they have going on in their heads so they can be happy, healthy, feel good about themselves, love themselves, and feel empowered to go after their dreams. Okay, so if you are somebody who needs some help and support around that, maybe you have a negative tape deck playing in your head like I used to, then reach out to me so I can support you. I'd love to hop on a call with you and figure out if there's a way that we can work together. And also, too, in the link that I provided in the description, I have some links to courses that I have on Udemy. And one of them that also helps with confidence and mindset as well. It's my magnum opus. So check it out if you're interested, okay? And without further ado, let's dive on into cultural gaslighting. Now, people who know me personally know that I'm also a community organizer. So I have been obsessed with politics and social justice work my entire life. And so I know, and so I research these things, I pay attention to studies, and in, one of the things that I like to talk about as well is not just what's happening in our world politically, but how it affects us from a mental health perspective, since that's a huge passion of mine. And I think that our mental health is critical for anything that we want to do. And unfortunately, there are things that are happening in our world today that are causing us to struggle, that are causing us to feel depressed, that are causing us to feel anxious and overwhelmed. And one thing, in addition to many things that are happening right now, is cultural gaslighting. So what is the definition of cultural gaslighting? Let's first jump into that. Well, I included a link in this description to a really powerful study on IGI Global, and I love their definition. They say cultural gaslighting, right? We've heard a lot about individual gaslighting, but cultural gaslighting is a form of mental abuse, okay? A form of mental abuse in which the dominant group, so whatever dominant group that is, whether it's gender, whether it's related to, sexuality, whether it's related to race, ethnicity, okay? So the dominant group intentionally or unintentionally, okay, so it could be intentionally or unintentionally, uses social and historical structural advantages to deny or subvert the level of harm that a cultural group has experienced. Okay, so that's critical. So they're doing it intentionally or unintentionally, deny or subvert the level of harm that a cultural group has experienced, thus presenting trauma responses as irrational or non-existent. Okay, so this is the gaslighting, right? So they're doing it either intentionally or unintentionally, acting as though your pain is not real. Okay, so presenting your trauma responses and you being upset about things that have happened on a cultural level, on a societal level, as being not true or irrational, or that you are overreacting. Okay, so this is a big, 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 huge deal. And it is, as you can see, it's a form of abuse in the same way that individual gaslighting is considered a form of abuse. And so, when we think about cultural gaslighting, I mean, there's so many ways that this shows up in our country, right? And the first thing that immediately comes to mind is for me as a Black woman, right? I've experienced this the Black way, the female way, the Black female way. And I'm sure, those of you watching may have experienced different forms of this. And if you haven't, then you can listen to this, right? And I'm looking at my notes to make sure that I get everything that I want to say. But, women and their experiences, right? I can remember multiple times having conversations with men, and I love and have excellent relationships with a lot of men. I have a lot of respect for men, but I've had conversations with men who I love who will say things that are undermining my experience, or kind of denying the severity of what I've experienced or what I've gone through, or kind of treating it as though it's overreacting. Another thing that also women experience too is if recently, in recent years, it became kind of a dirty word to call yourself a feminist. And that is a form of cultural gaslighting, because feminism at its core, all it is about women having equal standing, with men, right? Women who for centuries have been oppressed, right? We have data on that, right? It's not fake news to say that, but feminism is just about equality and bringing things to equal footing and empowering women. But it has been turned into or transformed into, in a lot of circles, into this kind of dirty word, right? And so and I think a lot of people might point to one or two women who might be extremes, who might say things like they hate all men, or you might see a video that goes viral where it's a negative, where it's not, where it doesn't reflect on all feminism, but it gets portrayed that way. So feminism has become a dirty word, and I think that that is a very real example of cultural gaslighting, right? Where it's turning something that was just about empowering women, about making everybody equal, about appreciating women's rights and their and how women are oppressed, and trying to level that playing field more, and instead it's turned into something that has become dirty, right? It's become a word that is kind of where women are like, I'm not a feminist, because it feels like a bad thing to say or to admit. So that is a form of cultural gaslighting. Also for people of color as well. And again, I'm looking at my notes to make sure I get everything correctly here. But, people of color describing how they are being oppressed, and a lot of times dominant groups invalidating them. So I see this experience happening a lot, in the US, being a black woman, seeing this happen with white people. I've seen this happen to my Latino friends, my Native American friends, my Asian friends, where you feel as though where that you are being oppressed, or where you see some type of microaggression, or there's some slight or full-on racism that happens. And for a long time, there were a lot of white people who were ignorant to what was happening, I remember before things started getting really big, and before people were capturing things on their cell phones, there was a lot of times where people, where you were being invalidated and being told that you were overreacting, or that it couldn't be that bad. And it wasn't necessarily because people were trying to be evil, but they were ignorant to what was happening, because it wasn't their experience, right? If you are white, you're going to be treated differently. You're not necessarily going to experience these things. You're not going to see them. And when we have privilege, we don't recognize, we're not able to see where we are privileged. So this is a very real thing that happens with people of color, and especially if you are, especially with race and ethnicity in this country. And another way that cultural gaslighting comes up is with LGBT plus communities, and when they speak out about their experiences, and it's, not only are they facing oppression and violence and discrimination, where laws, you have different states around this country that are, really trying to invalidate and go backwards and rewind the clock on their rights. And then when communities try to speak out, you have people who are saying, oh, well, they're overreacting, they're blowing it out of proportion, it's not that big a deal, or people, and just anytime you have somebody invalidating your experience or the experience of marginalized communities, there is cultural gaslighting. And it's very difficult, it's very challenging. Another way that cultural gaslighting shows up that is so hard and so overwhelming is when, in the United States specifically, the idea that we are in a fair and democratic system, or that this country has no problems. Okay. So listen, I just want to say this. I love this country. And I haven't always made that statement, because as a black woman growing up here, this country has not always done things that made me love it. But this is home for me. And I feel as though this country is imperfect, but I want to fight for the change. I want to fight for the goodness that I see in this country. There's so much about this country that is great and that I love. And there are problems. So there is another form of cultural gaslighting that comes from suggesting that the United States is perfect. Because no place is perfect, right? Even countries that have the happiest mental health care metrics, right? And the United States, by the way, out of all the developed countries, the United States ranks pretty low, despite the fact that it's one of the richest nations, right, when it comes to mental health metrics. And part of this is because, as I've mentioned before, you guys have heard me talk about how income has not, since the 1970s, has not gone up to meet expenses, so that people have to work multiple jobs, right? We also have a healthcare system that's pretty crazy and out of control, but, they're also, so you've heard me talk about that a lot if you followed me before, but I want to talk about something that's even deeper than that. When we talk about our fair and democratic system, And I've gotten into many debates and conversations with people around it. But there were a couple of different examples I wanted to bring up because I think this is an example of gaslighting that we have accepted as a culture when it comes to different systems in our country, in our political system. So, for example, the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College is something that has frustrated me for many years. And I love and encourage everybody to go out and explore the world, because if you go to different parts of the world, and especially, more functioning democracies, all of them think that we are nuts. When we talk about the Electoral College, when you go to other functioning democracies, they don't have an Electoral College, right? The Electoral College in the United States, if you're not familiar with it, it means that the way that our democracy works is not 100% democratic. So, in other words, people, and it's because I believe that, number one, I think that truth is very important, and I think that Donald Trump is a man who is a politician who has struggled with the truth quite a bit, and I think that truth is very, very important for good mental health and clarity and all of that. But our Electoral College, Donald Trump would not have been our president had it not been for the Electoral College. He did not win the popular vote, right? So this is, there is a lot of, now the Electoral College came about, as a compromise with, during the time of the Civil War, when it was trying to appease the states that had slavery, right, to make their voices more prominent and bolder. But now we are living in a time where that has hampered us, where we are not a true democracy. Okay, so if Donald Trump could be president, despite the fact that he was not popularly elected, there's something wrong with that system, right? And even if the reverse were true, if it was somebody who I had supported, I voted for Hillary Clinton during that election. If I had voted for her and she had been elected by the Electoral College and not by the popular vote, I wouldn't want that either, right? It's supposed to be about the will of the people. So we say the party line here, the slogan is that it is a democracy, but it is not, right? So that is another way in which we are made to feel as though this is a fair and free process, but it is not, and that can be overwhelming, right? It can make us feel hopeless. Another way in which we can feel hopeless, we have a Supreme Court that right now is functioning as a monarchy. They're functioning, well, not as a monarchy is one, but as an oligarchy, right? We have about 5 or 6 Supreme Court justices right now who are controlling the fate of 360 million people. And, if you look at what the founding fathers of this country, right, when they wrote those documents a couple hundred years ago, the country was a lot smaller. It was a lot less people, and they were very weary of a 2-party electoral political system, and they were also very wary of anything that would resemble monarchy. They were very wary of exactly what's happening. So, we need to also, so there's a lot of cultural gaslighting that makes us feel like, well, this is just a normal system. Also, too, the fact that Supreme Court justices, we have to wait for them to die, right? I mean, so there's a lot of different countries that don't do that, right? Where they have a shorter, where it's like 10 years or of a Supreme Court justice, so that it doesn't feel like monarchy, king rule, or oligarchy rule. So these are some ways in which we've been culturally gaslighted to accept that these things are just normal, and that if we complain about them, there's something wrong with us. That the founders set up this system because it was the best thing, and that they never intended for us to fix anything or change anything, and nothing could be further from the truth. But when we tell people this, it invalidates their suffering, it invalidates how they feel, and makes them feel depressed and anxious and frustrated, and that causes a lot of tension in this country. Not only that, too, but the politicians representing us. There are a lot of lobbyists in Washington, like thousands of lobbyists, and if you're not sure what a lobbyist is an advocate who is trying to get a politician to go to their particular cause, right? So we have lobbyists who are trying to go for big food companies, and lobbyists who are trying to support different religious groups. And there's nothing wrong with people advocating to our politicians, but there's a lot of money that's put into politics, right? And we're all just again, when we ask questions about this sort of thing, we're told that this is normal, that it's okay. And despite the fact, so what ends up happening in the US is that a lot of the laws that are most popular, like, the majority of the country does not want to outlaw abortion, right? I think it's like 67% does not want it to be outlawed, right? They want some restrictions on it, but they don't want it outlawed, right? And the majority of people want a good, livable minimum wage. The majority of people want good health care, right? And actually a significant amount of people want universal health care. But what happens is that these needs are not getting met because of all of these different things we've talked about, right? So it ends up creating frustration, right? And it ends up creating depression and anger and people taking things out on each other, right? We end up feeling, when you don't feel as though your country is listening to you, it ends up coming out in anger in other ways, right? We have increased mass shootings and school shootings. The anger is palpable, it's real. There are protests and riots that turn violent because the anger and frustration is real and it's valid and it's overwhelming and it'll swallow you whole and it's hard. And one of the other things that I just want to say is that, right now, it's when it comes to a lot of these policies that I said are pulling really high with the majority of the country, what we're told a lot of times too, and this is another form of cultural gaslighting, is that it's about that the people who want these policies, usually progressive politicians, that they want to get rid of your freedom, right? And this is a popular conservative talking line, that the left or progressive politicians are trying to get rid of your freedom, but nothing could be further from the truth, right? It's progressive ideals want people to if you are a trans person, go be trans, right? I'm not saying if you think that being trans, that there's something wrong with it, you don't have to be trans, right? And not only that, but trans is not a choice, right? It's how people are born and how they identify. And there's only a small minority of people who identify as trans, or, if you are gay, or if you are bisexual, or if you are pansexual, right? They're not trying to say everybody needs to be that way. They're just saying, let me be me, let me do me, right? So these progressive, and same thing with abortion. If you are anti-abortion, that's fine. It's all well and good. Nobody is saying that you need to go do it, right? If you want religious freedom, go get religious freedom. But if religious freedom does not mean that you get to tell other people how to be and act, that is control. That is judgment. That is you judging other people. That is power over others. So we need to really think through some of the ways in which we're being culturally gaslit. And again, the result of this is a lot of mental health issues and a lot of violence and a lot of problems. And so if you are, so we have to do everything to protect our mental health and our peace. And you're going to hear me say this all the time. If you are feeling overwhelmed by everything that is going on, reach out to me. I'd love to support you. But therapy, talking to people, support groups, and then being a part of some type of action where you feel as though you are making a difference will go a long way. And if you need some help and support and guidance around this, please just let me know. And again, sorry that this is kind of ranty. I just wanted to get this off my chest, and this is a longer video today, but I felt like it was kind of necessary to do. So think about if you have ever been a part of cultural gaslighting, and I know that I personally have, as somebody who's not a part of the LGBTQ plus community. I have certainly invalidated, people's feelings on an individual scale. I've certainly invalidated, bigger groups until I got educated and learned more about them. You are not a bad person if you are a part of that. Most of the time we just do it from a place of ignorance, a place of not knowing better. But once you know better, we have the power to do something different. We have the power to change it, okay? So with that said, I hope you all have a wonderful Saturday. Oh, and a wonderful Sunday. And a good week. Take care.